Hi, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I love colorful and sparkly makeup. Here on my channel, I try to avoid over-consuming colorful and sparkly makeup, and one of the ways that I do that is by duping palettes, duping new releases, and a lot of the time not new releases also, using single shadows and depotted shadows from my own collection. That's what we're going to be doing today, and today I'm going to be focusing on the Moon Wish palette from the Oden collection that came out recently. It's actually not even their most recent release. This one kind of passed me by when it initially came out. I wasn't super attracted by the color story. I really like blue eyeshadow, but I'm not ever super attracted to blue and like yellow. Or purple and yellow. The other thing is I have a lot of blue eyeshadow that I don't wear often enough, and so even though I saw those blue sparkly shades, and you know, I love the look of those, but for me to buy a palette for blue sparkly shades would be a bit of a miss. But a few weeks ago, I caught another glimpse of this palette, this color story, and I felt a little bit differently about it this time, and I think it's because now that we're fully in fall, the color story just kind of hit different. I think initially I was thinking of it as a palette of vibrant summery shades, you know, blues, yellows, bright purples, but with the sort of sensibility of fall, I look at this more as like a witchy autumnal kind of vibe. According to Oden's Eye, the inspiration for the Moon Wish palette is the, quote, celestial harmony of the sun and moon as reflected in the Swedish words solmåne. I think that's how you say it, solmåne. Here, sol represents the radiant sun and its goddess, while måne represents the serene moon and its divine counterpart. Sorry if I butchered the Swedish words there. Yeah, so the inspiration for this palette is sort of like celestial goddesses, I guess. For some reason, this feels really witchy to me, so that's how I'm interpreting it. You know, witches, goddesses, I feel like we're sort of in the same realm. And looking at it from that point of view, I think I actually do find it kind of interesting to pair those ethereal blues and purples with the more warm, cozy, autumnal kind of golden shades. Thinking of it as sort of like this fall magic kind of vibe, this witchy moon witch kind of vibe. I'm just so much more excited by the color story. So I made a dupe of this palette, and today I'm going to take you through the shades I chose to dupe it. It's not a perfect dupe. If you're interested, stick around, and if you like this kind of content, of course, make sure to subscribe to my channel and come back for more videos. I will also link below my palette building playlist. And by the way, the reference swatches that I used to create the palette were mainly from Millie at Bad to the Brow here on YouTube, as well as Amy Loves Makeup. So the first shade in the Oden's Eye palette is called Star. It's just sort of like a cool toned kind of almost pastel yellow. So I went with this shade called Big Smile from the ColourPop Fade into Hue palette. And it's just sort of like the coolest toned yellow I had. I didn't want something that would be too vibrant or too orangey. This is a sequin shade, but you know, it's functionally a matte. The next shade is called Moon, and this is one of the shades in the palette that was sort of like the most difficult to describe and discern exactly from swatches what it is supposed to be. On the brand website, it is described unhelpfully as a shimmer eyeshadow with iridescent shades on a platinum base. So it tells you nothing about the actual colors that you're supposed to be seeing. But in Millie's swatches, I was seeing some blue, and initially I thought it was supposed to be an iridescent blue, but it also has some multicolored shimmers that to me made it look a little bit verging on champagne or like almost golden. And in the palette photos, it actually does look like a gold, like in the pan. It looks like a very light gold. So it's a super interesting shade. I thought immediately of this shade Ice Blink from Shine by SD and Seekingshifts. This is one that is basically a blue iridescent, but it's combined with this orange shimmer, and the two complementary shimmer colors together sort of bring this into the territory of a champagne or a gold, or almost like a white, like it really does kind of feel like that Oden's eye description of just like an iridescent shimmer. It's kind of undefined in this really interesting way. So I think that is actually a really good fit for this shade Moon. The next shade is called Crater. It's described as a soft matte dusty pink, and I chose to go with this shade All Night from the Glamlite Chocolate Martini palette. This feels like, you know, a dusty pink verging on purple, because I do feel like in some of the swatches I was seeing this was almost like a purple shade. The next shade, Meteor, is described as a shimmer eyeshadow gold with multicolored sparkles, resembling a shooting star. So I had a lot of trouble with this one, to be honest, because none of the golds I was swatching were like orangey enough for like a true gold. I was mostly finding like kind of light ethereal golds in my collection, which, don't get me wrong, I think that does fit the vibe of the palette, so I'm not mad about it. But I went with this one that I thought was kind of like the most yellow thing that I could muster that still had sparkle, because this shade in Millie's swatches was looking a lot sparklier than some of the darker golds I have in my collection. And this is also from the Glamlite Chocolate Martini palette. It's called Rich. I'll build it up a little bit. I have a problem with swatching things because I like such a sheer application, because I like to be able to see the sparkles and things. So sometimes when I swatch, it doesn't actually show you what the true color is. There, I think you can see. Beautiful. The next shade in the Moonwish palette is called Space. It's described as a highly saturated matte deep blue. I went back and forth about this one a lot, actually, because I have a lot of kind of vibrant blue mattes that could be described in this way. I decided to go with this one from ColourPop. This is from the Blue Moon palette, and it's called Fine China. It's a beautiful, just really intense cobalt blue almost, and I never use it. It's not a flattering color on me whatsoever. It's definitely not the tone of blue that I typically go for when I'm wearing blue eyeshadow. I lean toward things with a little bit more green in them, but I think it's a beautiful color. Okay, the next shade is called Moonlight. It's described as a shimmer eyeshadow with soft blue and subtle purple micro glitters, reminiscent of Moonlight. I decided to go with this shade Cookie Dough from Looxi, which is an iridescent blue. And that's how I was seeing this in Millie's swatches. It was quite sheer. I love this eyeshadow so much. And I'm seeing a very prominent purple shift right here on my arm. I think in the viewfinder, I'm seeing that you're just getting blue. Maybe there you get a little bit of it. On the eyes, I would say it's subtle. I would say it's much more just a true blue iridescent on the eyes. Very ethereal, very magical, fairy type vibes. This is just really a magnificent eyeshadow, and it's so sparkly on the eyes. Now this next shade is called Dust in the Moonwish palette. It is described as a matte camel yellow resembling desert sand. Now when I was seeing this palette swatch, I was actually, at first I thought this was more of a rosy toned brown transition shade. I think that's kind of how it shows up in their swatches. In the palette, it looks like a kind of yellow toned beige. But I decided to go with something quite a bit more yellow than anything I was seeing in the swatches. This is Dijon from DandylionsCo. And I just kind of thought this would be like an interesting choice for the palette, since we do have these other yellow shades and there's another warm deepening shade in the palette. So I don't know, I figured why not. Okay, the next shade is called Universe. And this is described as a shimmer eyeshadow, light purple with multicolored fine glitters. A lot of the shades in this palette seem to have this sort of unspecified multicolored sparkle or multicolored glitter, which personally I don't really love. I do like a contrasting shimmer and a contrasting base. I like when there's, you know, one or two different colors in the shimmer. That's pretty fun. But I personally don't really love this trend of putting like a ton of different colored sparkles and things. And I definitely don't like when they're not like specified what different colors they're gonna be, because, you know, I like to be able to control what the colors are gonna look like on my eye. I don't want there to be like a wild card shimmer that's gonna clash, you know, with other things I'm trying to pair it with or whatever. That's just my personal preference. So I think that in the case of this dupe, in some ways, I prefer using the shades from my collection to whatever would be in the real palette. But I decided to go with this shade, which is called Once Upon a Time. It's from Looxi, and it's kind of just like a slightly more opaque version of this purple blue shade, Cookie Dough. You can see it has a slightly more present purple base, and it has this very bright, vibrant blue shimmer. And I think the shimmer does sort of shift to a purple as well, but you definitely have that purple base very present. I really like that shade, and that blue is like so bright, like it stands off the eye so much when you wear this shade. I really love that one. This first purple matte is called Dark Matter, and it's described as a matte grayish purple. This one's not super gray. The one I chose, it's called Lilac. It's from the Beauty Bay Midnight palette. It's more like a pastel. I mean, it's just really a no-brainer for pairing with shades like this. So yeah, hopefully it matches the tones correctly. The next one is called Pluto. It's described as a shimmer eyeshadow in lilac shades with various purple glitters. In Millie's swatches, you can see this one kind of going from a purple to a pink. So for this, I chose this shade Sharpest Knife from the Glamlite Ghostface palette. It has like sort of like a pinky purple kind of shimmer over top. It does have the multicolored sparkle thing going on, which is kind of funny because I feel like this is one of the shades in the palette that doesn't describe itself as doing that. But this has like an orange, a green, a blue, and then the more prominent pinky purple. It has like kind of a grayish smoky base to it. But yeah, overall I feel like this reads a little bit more purple than these two, which have purple in them but come off pretty much blue in the shimmer. So I think this adds something nice to the palette. Yeah, and the description on the brand website does describe that as more of a lilac. So I think of a lilac as leaning a little bit more pink versus like a lavender or an indigo, which would lean a little bit more blue. So the next shade is also described as a lilac. It's called a matte lilac, and this is the shade Planet. I decided to go with another shade from the Beauty Bay Midnight palette. I believe this one's called 1993, which is the year I was born, but I don't know why this eyeshadow is called that. Is this a particularly like 90s themed color? I don't know. It sort of reminds me of that, like, you know, that jazz pattern, the old that was on like styrofoam cups. Sort of reminds me of the purple in that, but I don't know. I'll pop up a picture. It's probably nothing like this. Don't have much to say about that one except that it's, I do wear these two together. I know it's a nice deepening shade for this lilac, so I think it's pretty functional. Okay, so for the last purple shimmer in the palette, Millie describes this as a smoky light purple, and she says it has some various colored shimmer particles in it, including gold and blue. Oden's Eye describes it as a shimmer eyeshadow in gray tones with multicolored sparkles. So again, not super descriptive. This shade looks so beautiful when Millie swatches it. I didn't have anything quite the same as what that one was doing, but to capture the contrasting like warm shimmer that seems to be in this one, as well as the smokiness, I decided to go for this really impactful shade called Oxidize. This is from Clionadh. It's one of the more shifty multichromes that I own, so it's definitely like a wild card of a shade. I will say that. It's got this smoky grayish purple base, or maybe it's just a gray base, honestly, and it shifts between a deep purple and a deep teal. And it has very prominent orange shimmer, as well as I'm seeing like some pink, some green, It's a very interesting shade. Definitely a wild card. Like, it's not that easy to pair with other things because there's so much going on. It's more of a statement that you sort of wear on its own, but it's a gorgeous eyeshadow. It definitely has the smokiness of that eyeshadow, even though I would describe this as a deep purple, not a smoky light purple. I don't know, it's fun to include these kinds of shades in BYOPs because they're the shades that are like the most undupable, I guess. So sometimes having this in a palette makes me feel like, oh, you know, I have a special unique version of this palette that actually I wouldn't have gotten if I had bought the Oden's Eye, you know, out of the box version of this color story. That said, the next shade is super boring. This is called Saturn. It's a matte orange brown, and I think I pretty much captured that with this shade Baked. It's from the Beauty Bay Earthy palette, a very orange matte brown. This is my go-to like warm brown deepening shade. So many browns turn cool toned, I find, when you blend them out, but this one is just very much a reddish orange based brown. The next shade is fittingly called Neptune. It is a sea blue eyeshadow. It's described by Oden's Eye as a bright shimmer eyeshadow in sea blue. It's so vibrant. This is the shade that like spoke to me in the palette. I love this kind of blue tone. In Millie's swatches, you can also see that this has a pretty obvious duochromatic shift to purple, and I would say it has a little bit of warmth to it. I would describe this as a cerulean kind of blue. I guess that's what a sea blue is. I chose the shade Daniel, which is an Oden's Eye shade. It's from their Jewel Shine, you know, singles collection. This one's really hard to swatch because it's super, like, it's kind of oily and it hard pans, but I really, really love this eyeshadow a lot. And this is just described as a shimmer. It's not even described as a duochrome, but it definitely has a shift to purple, which I will try to show you. But from straight on, it's just this bright, bright sea blue, cerulean blue. So summery. I love it so much. Yeah, and it's kind of a chaotic color story. It's interesting. Like, that is the shade that speaks to me in this palette, but looking at it, like, it sort of throws off the others. I wouldn't have necessarily chosen to put these shades together, but it's very interesting. This makes me realize that the palette is actually way less blue than I realized, even though this shade is, you know, it's like my eye was drawn to it. It looks very, it jumps out in swatches and stuff because it's so bright. It's one of the brightest things in the palette, but really it's a purple palette with blue shifts and some golden and brown tones, which honestly, like, I didn't realize that there was just one really opaque blue shimmer in this entire palette. The last shade is called Lunar Eclipse, and it's described as a matte violet. This one I went back and forth over. I decided to go with something quite pink toned, but then when I looked back at the brand swatches, looks maybe like it's more blue toned than the one I chose, but that's fine. This is just a kind of blackened plum, maybe? I don't think it's too far off. This is also from the Midnight palette from Beauty Bay. I don't have a label on it because I depotted that palette without like keeping great track of the shade names. And there's so many repetitive shades in that palette that honestly, I couldn't figure it out when I went back to try and label them. So unnamed shade from Beauty Bay there, but that's fine. Here's the finished palette. Hopefully you just saw swatches. I'm pretty happy with this palette. I've actually used it a few times since I built it, and I've mainly done lilac and blue looks with it, which is not necessarily something new to me. It's not something that I wouldn't have paired together anyway. I think it would be fun to do a get ready with me where I ideally would like try to step out of my comfort zone and do some of these more unlikely pairings. because I think that is the benefit of this color story. It's combining things that are complementary, things that are very, you know, they're opposed to each other. There's this duality, the sun, the moon. Even within the moon theme, you have the contrast of the light and the dark, moonlight that stands out because it's coming through the darkness of space. We will see if I get around to making that video. Stay tuned. That's pretty much the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you watched, let me know down below. Are you interested in this color story? Do you pair these kinds of tones together yourself? I feel like this palette didn't get a ton of buzz in the indie community, and it might be because it came out like in late summer, when there's definitely a lull in content and makeup releases and stuff. But I feel like Oden's eye palettes, they're usually those kinds of releases where you do see everybody putting out a video the day that they launch, and I don't know, if there was buzz about this, I kind of missed it. Thank you again for joining me. I hope you'll come back for future videos, and again, I will leave my palette building playlist linked below. I will see you very soon in a future video. Bye!